Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Jennifer Kretschmer, AIA, committee member of AIA California's Professional Practice Advisory Committee, and I will be the moderator for today's Small Firm Exchange Roundtable. This session qualifies you for one AIA Learning Unit for those who are watching live. AIA California staff will report those units for you. As always, all webinar content and additional resources will be available on the AIA California website shortly after the session. So let me give you a few quick housekeeping reminders before we get started. Please mute yourself when you are not participating in the discussion to avoid any background noise, and use the chat box to answer any questions for today's presenter. Ask any questions for today's presenter. The questions will be answered during the Q&A portion toward the end of the presentation. Today's session will focus on small firm data, how the small firm exchange is organized, initiatives it has undertaken to help small firms, and as always, you can become involved with the small firm exchange at either the local, state, and national levels. I would like to quickly introduce today's presenter before getting the program started. Our presenter today is Matthew Clapper. Matthew is the president and founder of MAD, Modern Architecture and Development, and UD4U, an urban design consultancy. He is a licensed architect and holds a Master of Architecture degree from the University of Kansas, a Master of Science in Architecture and Urban Design from Columbia University in New York City, as well as an Advanced Professional Certificate in Real Estate Development from NYU. He is a LEED accredited professional. And before he started MAD, he worked in the New York City offices of Perkins, Eastman, and Greenberg Farrow, as well as the Paris, France office of Ebos and Vittart. He serves on the AIA National Small Firm Exchange Committee as the Illinois representative and is currently the 2021 chair. In addition to his national volunteer work, he is on the local AIA Chicago boards of the Regional and Urban Design Knowledge Committee and the local SFx Chicago group. Matthew.
Thanks, Jennifer. Welcome, everybody. Let me just start sharing my screen so we can kind of jump right into everything. All right, so here is the standard disclaimer that everyone has seen a million times. Moving right along. So today, like she said, we're here about the SFx. The Small Firm Exchange has been a national member group since 2005. So not too old in comparison to several of the other groups, kind of like a teenager still, which is why we're a little less known than some of the other groups as well, and why we're kind of going through the growing pains and changes that we're going to talk about during this presentation that we've implemented this year to try to serve everyone a lot better that is a small firm owner. So the agenda today, as you'll see, is that we're going to do a little bit of overview of what the SFx is, how we're repositioning within the SFx, or how we're repositioning the SFx within the AIA to kind of work better at all levels, and then how we're internally working as a group a little differently, and then how we have converted to being state-based, which is also how the AIA will be converting in the future as well. We kind of just took a little bit of an early jump start on them. And then we'll end with a Q&A about anything that you guys want to talk about from the presentation, or just anything locally, like in California or local chapters, things like that. Okay, so overview of the SFx is that we started this year by kind of looking at the data that was out there. AIA hasn't really done too much in terms of actually looking up and gathering information on small firms specifically. So we kind of had to do some reverse engineering from the three documents you see listed there at the top, which is the 2018 NCARB report, and then the 2015 and 2020 AIA firm survey report. And what that led to is basically a breakdown of a few things. We learned that the AIA has roughly 19,000 firms within it, which equate to about 177,000 employees. And then we know from NCARB that there's about 116,000 licensed architects, 94,000 of which are AIA members. And then we know that there's 94,000 AIA members, but only 62,000 or so of them are actually AIA licensed architects. So we know that AIA represents just about half, a little over half of all licensed architects that exist in the state. So we broke that down a little bit further. So looking at firms themselves specifically, we know from the 19,000 AIA firms that about 75% of them are considered small firms, which is 10 employees or less. So that means a little over 14,000 small firm owners within the AIA right now as it stands. That's not accounting for, firms that are owned by more than one architect necessarily, and also obviously ones that aren't AIA members. So we know that there's more than that in all likelihood. We're able to break that down a little bit further and know that within the AIA, of those 14,000 firms, about 25% of them are sole practitioners, 35% have 1 to 5 employees, and 15% have 5 to 10. So looking at how much the impact small firms have everywhere else, we kind of extrapolated that to how many people do they employ. We know that they employ about 18% of all of the 177,000 employees, which would mean that they're responsible for an additional just under 32,000 people. So when you put that with the firm owners and all of their staff, within the AA, there's about 46,000 people that fall under that umbrella of small firm. So scaling that up for NCARB numbers for people who are not AIA members, but are architects in the country, we know that there's probably roughly somewhere around 67,000 people that either run or work in a small firm across the country. So we wanted to start there by just showing and highlighting that that's a very big number, and something that we probably never really think about or feel ourselves as small firm owners. Because when we think about the large firms, we think about like what we're talking about there on those counts, that you think about like Gensler and 6,000 people, you think about HOK and SOM and Perkins and Will and all that. And they do have large numbers, but you can see that actually, even if you take all of them together, it's actually less than all the small firms put together. So that's kind of the point that we were trying to drive home this year. And by looking at that data, was that, it's really easy for us to be dismissed or feel dismissed and isolated. But the reality is that we can actually come together. We are larger than all of the large firms combined, and definitely larger than any of them individually. So we need to start finding ways to leverage that size and collaborate and influence, just like the individual large firms are able to do on their own. So the core functions of SFx basically contain 3 things. The first job is that we're mostly there to curate and disseminate the most pertinent resources and information from both within the AIA and anywhere else that we're able to find it that is of benefit to small firms, and get that out to all of you guys so that you guys can just be aware of anything and everything that might help you. The second is to tell the AIA of all the current issues that small firms are facing, that we're hearing about from all of you, and areas that the resources and information are lacking. So as we're putting that information out, we try to hear back. And if there's a gap somewhere, we want to tell AIA so that they can focus some resources on filling that. And then lastly, the last task is to advocate for the value of small firms, like we're saying, and the National SFx Group and the local groups, both to the AIA itself and to the public, so that the public is well aware of the benefits of working with a small firm as well. So the 2021 and going forward goal has been to create this sustainable framework of communication. We want it to be able to result in a way that the core functions of the SFx that we just went over can kind of be self-sustaining going forward, and allow the board to kind of free up their time in the future to be able to focus on these like special projects and areas that have been lacking, to create better resources for small firms going forward. Historically, just to kind of tell you a bit of the issues that we've been running into since we were founded, is that normally you would think that the AIA would work like a regular library does, where you can go in and you can be like, hey, I want information on X, Y, or Z, and they just tell you where to go find it. That's logically how you would think it works, but unfortunately that is not how it's set up. There is no real central organization system within the AIA, because it's created across multiple different groups, and all of those groups basically hold their own content that they've created. So if the KCs like us, or so any knowledge community, whether it be CRAN or SPD, small project design, any group that makes its own content and puts it out, you have to know A, what they have, and B, that they're the ones that actually have it, to be able to go to them and find it, to be able to share out to your people. So obviously that creates a big problem and creates lots of silos. And that was always the problem we were running into, was trying to work with the AIA itself. And we just kept being told that, like, well, it's not really easy to find that information, that it might be over there, but we don't know what they have, and so on and so forth. And so that's kind of, historically, it ran into us spending a lot of time kind of spinning our wheels, trying to find the information we wanted, and or wasting a lot of energy kind of reproducing something that already probably exists somewhere else, or we found out existed somewhere else, a year or two later. So we wanted to address that issue as part of our redesign this year and restructuring. So how we started working with the AIA is that this is kind of a very simple overview of how the AIA National Structure works. A lot of people don't know this either, so we kind of wanted to just lay this out for everyone. On the left-hand side, you can see everyone that's basically gets voted in and elected. So you have like your strategic council members, your board committees, the board of directors, and the president, and so on. And you can see that, the chapters pick your strategic counselors, and then the strategic council reports to the board, and so on and so forth. And on the right side, you have the CEO, who runs AIA's internal issues and all the AIA staff, who therefore support the different knowledge communities and member groups, which on the bottom side are made up of and filled by all of you as AIA members that are volunteering to those different communities and member groups. Additionally, like when we talk about knowledge communities and member groups and board groups, this is kind of the full list of what exists within the AIA. Knowledge communities, their main job is to kind of create content. Their job is to focus on a specific topic. So that's why there's so many of those, and why they're more specific. And then member groups, their job is to focus on a specific, basically like demographic of AIA members. So for small firm exchange, obviously, like our job is to look at everyone that owns or works for a small firm defined as 10 people or less. Whereas Young Architects Forum's job is to look at everyone that's licensed for 10 years or less. And then National Associates Committee is anyone who is graduated but doesn't have their license, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of how the difference between knowledge communities and member groups work out. And then there's always a couple board groups that are created every year. And then some that are consistent, like Strategic Council. And then we also kind of wanted to include future like non-AIA groups like NOMA and others that might be able to be collaborated with going forward. So for us, as you see, that's kind of what I just laid out, is like, what the job of KCs is, and member groups and board groups are. But for us specifically, we wanted to assign a liaison from the SFx to every knowledge community and member group and board group as possible, to kind of help start to fix that problem of that siloing issue. We wanted to be able to have that liaison to every group so that we can be informed on what they do have and what they're working on, so that we wouldn't be reinventing the wheel. And then also we would always be in the know of what is being shared and what is coming out soon, so that we can be sure to pass that on to all of you guys across the country, and so that you can stay up to date on everything. So this is kind of how it works, how we've inserted ourselves into that national structure. So like I said, every board member is assigned to be a liaison to a either knowledge community or other member group. And then the current chair and past chairs are assigned to the board level and strategic council committees to be able to tap into them and be informed on what's going on at that level. And then our internal groups and our new state rep roles, their job will be to go directly to you guys at state and local chapters and to the members directly to kind of share out that information during the year. And then also we have a conference and outreach group whose job will be to share that on social media and then obviously at AIA's national conference and sessions and things like that. So our new internal workflow looks something like this, where we go back to that first core job of what the SFx is, where it's to gather, curate, and share all of this information with you guys as much as possible. So our ideal kind of place of being would be to kind of be like our own Google, where anyone that is a part of a small firm could come to us and basically kind of find whatever they needed and find answers to whatever question they may have. That's obviously not where we're at right now, but that is the ultimate goal, 10 years from now, probably. So it works something like this, that at the top, we have all of those different AIA KCs that we're trying to gather that information from, as well as other AI groups, such as the trust and the board groups. But then we're also always constantly, as we all do, reading articles from different architecture websites, magazines, the New York Times, wherever it may be. And we're trying to gather that information as well. So we're trying to just take all of that, bring it into the SFx, and then we kind of start to curate and look at what is pertinent. And then we will share everything that is pertinent back out via the state reps and the chapters and the different conference sessions we may make, and then on our social media platforms. So with our integration into the KCs and other member groups, the idea for that basically came about from my first KLA experience, which was the last in-person one in Denver in 2019, I believe, yeah. Where for those who don't know what KLA is, it's the Knowledge Leadership Assembly. And so basically the chair and maybe a couple other people from every knowledge community and member group are invited to come to this one big meeting that would happen every year. And part of that Denver meeting was basically a half day of kind of speed dating, where every group was able to talk to another group for 20 minutes at a time. And those short conversations were some of the most productive that our group had ever had up until that point. And so we were trying to figure out, or I was trying to figure out basically from then forward, like how we could expand on that idea, because we only got to talk to each group 20 minutes once a year. And so it was very limiting, but it was very valuable, even though it was very limited. So it was, how do we build upon that idea? And then so the teaming with the other member groups is that because the KCs are focused on topics, we want to team up with other member groups that we might also have some crossover with. So, many young architect forum people may also be small firm owners or work within small firms as well. And there might be a lot of issues that can overlap, and we could team up on resources and create, different sessions or products or whatever it might be that could benefit a wider range of people by teaming up together. And then lastly was, how do we get all this information out to you guys? And so we realized that there's kind of two levels of this. There's an internal communication AIA, like via AIA stuff. So that's at your conference sessions, the webinars. We have a newsletter that gets put out to people who've signed up for our group on KnowledgeNet, the AIU Small Firm Series, and any new projects that may come up in the future. And then there's also external communication, which kind of bypasses AIA's internal structure and goes straight to the end user. And that's via like our Instagram platforms and Facebook and Twitter and all that. And then some of the webinars we've created are available whether you're an AIA member or not. So always kind of conscious of there being two ways to try to reach people, because our goal is to help all small firms as well, not just specifically AIA member ones, because we want to obviously be able to bring in others that may not be AIA members right now because they see the value in the future. So how our group works at the board level looks like this. We take all of that information and content gathering from the different liaisons to the different KCs and member groups, and then as well as any articles everyone's reading. That gets kind of pushed down into the next level so that everything that's applicable to small firms will be shared with our outreach group. There's an internal group of the board members of like about 3 of them, where their sole task for the year is to focus on scheduling out all of this information to the social media, to our newsletters, and so on. And then as a board as a whole, we kind of take that content and look at what do we want to develop further. And so that's where we'll get into special projects. So for example, this year we've created a toolkit for how you create a local SFx group at your chapter, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well as a couple webinar sessions and things like that. So any content that we think is more valuable gets pushed down to that special projects level. And then anything that we think is of incredibly high value, we set aside to be developed as like a conference session at AIA's national conference level. So that obviously takes more work and also has its own internal board group of about 3 members that are dedicated to taking whatever we highlight as, you know, the most valuable content for that year or pertinent, you know, and timely to be developed into conference sessions or, you know, multiple ones or singular ones for the next year's AIA conference. So the general idea is, as you saw, as everything gets funneled down, is to kind of start to create this system of constant communication with all of you at different value levels. So the first point is to basically kind of be getting enough information from all the KCs and member groups and from outside sources that we can be sending things out on our social media platforms on a, you know, basically daily basis, hopefully. That content might be, you know, less targeted, but it'll be more frequent. And so you'll be able to just kind of glance at it and see if it applies to you. And if it does, great. If not, you kind of just move on and check again the next day. The next level of those special projects means that it's going to be a little bit more curated and a little more targeted, but it won't come out as frequently. It'll probably come out, you know, those quarterly newsletters that come out. And then lastly, obviously, the very targeted that will apply to most people will only come out like once a year at those AIA conference sessions and like webinars and things like that. So like I said, our outreach group is a dedicated group of some of the board members that, you know, focuses purely on curating and disseminating that information. These are all the different social media platforms, and then our websites. Basically, the website is probably the easiest and most simple one to remember, which is just aia.org/SFx. That's what you'll probably want to take away from this to be able to get to any of the rest of these. Like all the social media links are on there. This presentation is even on there later if you want to look back and review as we go through stuff, if you're not catching everything. But it's just a great kind of homepage resource that we also kind of revamped. It's our KnowledgeNet site, but we revamped it this year to try to treat it more like a homepage than most of the KnowledgeNet sites are able to do. And then, like I mentioned before, the conference group will take those most valuable content things to create specific sessions. We've also continued a thing from the previous years that you see from the 2017 schedule, is that we also kind of look at all of the conference sessions that are available, period, when the entire list comes out. And we try to create a small firm conference track collection, basically to tell everyone that is a small firm owner, hey, here are the sessions that actually apply to small firms on a daily basis, to try to help you, do an initial narrow down of everything that's offered at conference. And then we also obviously work with whatever local chapter is hosting it that year to do tours and networking events. We always usually have this SFx party at them when they're in person. And then we've had a business lounge in the past before and things like that. So that's what our conference group is dedicated towards. And a few of the other special projects that have happened is that we have a small firm series on AIU. We've created a business plan template for small firms in the past that can also be found on the website, because we know that most of us never sat down and created a business plan. We just kind of jumped right into it and have been going ever since. But it's definitely something valuable to have for planning for your future. And then the ones this year that we've done is that we've teamed up with CRAN to try to have a session at their conference next year in Chicago. So we're working with them on what that will be, and then hopefully we'll be able to try to expand the CRAN symposium more and more every year into more of like a small firm and CRAN symposium, because there is so much overlap between residential architects and small firm architects, that we think we can we think we can inject a few more kind of like overall business type issues to the CRAN symposium than specifically residential ones that would still apply to everybody. And then, like I mentioned before, we also created a template this year for how you can create a local SFx group, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The next thing is getting to how we as a group have transitioned from that regional version to being state-based, which is also how the AIA is going. Like I said, we jumped the gun on it earlier in the year, so we had decided to make this change before AIA National decided to make this change. Member groups are able to do that because we kind of have our own charters and can have a little bit more independence in how we function. So we, at our annual meeting in January, voted to go state-based before the national vote that happened in the middle of the year. So this is basically just talking about how that may or may not happen, but now it's officially happened. So here's how the SFx reps had currently been set up and picked, and how we are still this year organized. But this is what we were wanting to change, is that you'll see that the regions for places like, you know, Texas, Illinois, New York, California, you guys, there's not much of a change in how it worked, because we were all single state regions. Me being in Chicago, also single state region, so not that much was ever going to change because we already were single states. But it made a big difference for us when you look at places like Western Mountain region or Northwestern Pacific, where before, you know, you would have one person chosen to a 3-year term that would represent 7 states. And so basically that meant that, you know, one person for 3 years from all these 7 states, you're blocking out so many people from participating, as well as the logistical issues of, you know, is the person from Montana really talking to the people in Alaska and Hawaii? It almost never is happening. And same thing in the other groups, that like, is the person from Iowa talking to the person from Oklahoma? Not that often. And so there's this always kind of that barrier of getting people involved, because they were just used to always being kind of shut out from it because opportunities didn't come up very often. And then also from the communication standpoint of, it was just a lot to ask one person to cover so many states and think that they were going to be able to do that effectively. So we wanted to be able to change that. And so the question again kind of went back to some data of like, okay, so how do we go about that? So the first thing we did was we wanted to look at where the licensed architects actually lived. This is slightly different than how AIA ended up doing their version. So their version is based upon where our AIA members located. And we didn't really care so much about whether they were members or not. We just wanted to care that we were covering all architects, all small firm architects, regardless of if they were AIA members or not. So that's what this breakdown was, is this shows where every licensed architect in the country lives. And what you can see is that basically a little more than half of the country, half of the architects in the country are represented by 8 states. So that's where we took this next approach from. And those blue states that you see are those 8 primary states that represent more than half of all architects in the country. So what we did was we wanted to assign those 8 states permanent board seats on the SFx because of the proportion of architects that they truly represent across the country. And then that the rest of the country would fill the remaining 22 kind of rotating seats on the board. But now it wasn't by region. Now, if you wanted to have a Colorado person and a Utah person apply to the board, they're free to do that and more than welcome to. But this is kind of the breakdown of how the percentage of every state, the percentage that every, how am I trying to say this? This is the breakdown of all of the architects in the country, yeah, by the percentage that it lives in that state. So California, you guys can see, obviously, naturally, you guys are the largest. You have 14.5%, of all architects in the country, basically. And then it goes from there. So the hierarchy within the SFx going forward is that we will have an executive committee, which consists of 5 of the 30 board members. So they're, the ones that kind of steer the ship. And then there's the remaining 25 board members that are working on those outreach and conference groups, and then also all of the special projects that happen every year. We also currently have some permanent liaisons to CRAN, SPD, and NOMA that might get absorbed into kind of just that larger overall liaison program we have, but that has been a crossover from before, where we knew that there was so much overlap with those groups that we wanted to have a permanent liaison with them already. And now we've created this new state representative position, which allows for 55 states, we say, because the 50 states plus the territories and an international seat. So how the board will work is that it initially consists of all the regional reps that were there now. They become the first kind of board level. And then, as you've seen in the calls that have gone out in the past week or so from AIA, we have an open call all year long for people to apply to fill the remaining up to 30 seats. So I believe there's 17 of us right now. So there's about 13 open seats that can get filled. A few of us are actually rotating off this year too, because our terms are up. So there's a bit more than that, but there are the 8 permanent seats then, like we went over from those states, and then we'll have 22 that can kind of rotate in and out as the seats open. But basically what that means is that if you're from a permanent seat, you will always be able to hold that position. Like California will always have a seat open. So if, say, you didn't fill it one year, it'll just be there waiting to get filled at the next time. You won't be waiting like the 3 years for an open seat. But that's how the rotating ones will work, is that basically once somebody's term is up, after their 3 years, there will be a few, handful of seats open every year, probably say like, roughly 5 every year or something going forward. That when the terms are up, they'll be open, and basically any other state aside from those 8 will be able to fill it. So what we ask of the, so we ask is that the maximum number of board seats is a little bit flexible as well too, because obviously this is our first attempt into kind of doing this big restructuring for our group, and so we've left it a little bit flexible for people to be able to make future changes. But we wanted to also make sure that everybody gets covered. So knowing that we probably wouldn't get a state rep from every state in the first go, that it helps also just distribute the board members' responsibilities. So like in the past, like we had seen on that initial regional representative map, that there was one person for 6 or 7 states sometimes. Now, once we have the state reps in place, whatever remaining states don't have a state rep will be covered by the board. But what that means is that it'll be much more equitable. So like there'll be one board member that'll be required to cover, maybe like 2 states each or something that way. So we distribute it evenly amongst the board members. So instead of one having 7 and one having 1, everybody might just have like 2 or something to cover the slack of whatever is not being covered by the state reps. So for the board, their responsibilities will be to participate in monthly calls and go to an in-person annual meeting once those are back after COVID. But if not, there'll still be a digital annual meeting that you have to make time for. AIA covers the costs of those annual meetings when they're in person. And then there will be an opportunity for some of the board members throughout the year to attend other conferences such as KLA or Grassroots or AIA Conference and so on. They're also expected to contribute 1 article a month to our Flipboard program, which is how we collect all of those outside resources and news articles that everyone's reading, and how we able to centralize where we put them and how we can disseminate them. That kind of just helps us ensure that there's that steady stream of information to all of you. They'll also be expected to kind of give presentations like this, or do like informative sessions at their state or regional conferences, in collaboration with the local state reps in the future. And then if you're a part of, you're expected to either be a part of the outreach group, special projects, or conference. So, depending on which one you're a part of, you'll either be responsible for helping create and send out the quarterly newsletters, or you'll be tasked with curating content, as a special project that can be disseminated throughout the year, or dive deeper and help create those AIA sessions for conference next year. So for the state reps, like I said, there will be 55 seats available, the 50 states plus the territories and international seats. Again, state reps from the 8 permanent board seats. We're trying to kind of be from a different geographical location as much as possible. Obviously, easier said than done as we start out. But the idea is, if you're from LA as a board, if the board member's from LA, then the state rep would be from San Francisco area or something like that. It's basically like one's from the south, one's from the north. Same thing with New York, one from upstate, one from the city type thing. In the future, we want to say, once this has been going long enough that, we want you to be a state rep first before becoming a board member, just so you can start to get kind of that knowledge and be able to hit the ground running when you do become a board member and you don't have to spend so much time getting up to speed. You also need to be a licensed architect and either already be or be willing to become an AIA member, as well as be a part of a small firm, obviously. And then the state rep role is a little bit less intense in terms of commitment than the board level is. The board level is for 3 years with the option to do a 4th year, whereas state reps is just for 1 year at a time, and you can renew it for up to 5 years if you're that interested in it. But the dedication isn't as high as it is for being a board member. But also, like if somebody signs up and they aren't participating, the board also has the ability to remove them and replace them. But it allows those 1 year terms allow people to kind of dip their toe, see if they're interested, and also allows other people to come in if the others decide to leave, and so on and so forth. Just trying to eliminate barriers of entry and try to create a way for more people to be able to participate. So like I was saying already, it was like, just try to find ways of distributing all this information a little bit better. That's what the state reps will help us do. There'll be that boots on the ground type role. It'll help lighten the board's load work, like we're saying, in terms of trying to cover all of these states so that we can then focus on actually gathering and creating the content that will actually be the most valuable to everybody that we start sharing out. And then on the flip side, it helps us create that pipeline, like we said, to become future board members that are more informed when they do start that board position than if you were just dropped in like you currently are. And then obviously it allows us to be much more diverse and inclusive by just creating a lot more pathways to participation. Just allows us to create a much broader collection of voices, obviously. So here's what the rep roles will be. As you can see, it was less than the board. The reps will be required to participate in 2 calls every month instead of 4. They will be a part of our all calls with the different KCs and member groups that we invite, so that's how they can start to get up to speed before they become board members and just listen in and learn what these other KCs and member groups do and what they're up to. They will also be required to contribute, at least 1 article a month to that same system so that we can help disseminate valuable information. And then they will be tasked with distributing the quarterly newsletter and any other information to the chapters within their state and other SFx groups in their state as well, to make sure that we're actually getting the distribution to the people that it needs to get to. And then occasionally they'll be asked to team up with the board members to give presentations such as this at their state chapters and other regional conferences and such. So some of the resources, we talked about some of these before. There's also the small firm compensation report that comes out every year. The next one comes out in December, I believe, for 21. But it's always a great kind of resource to tell you where your firm is in terms of how you're doing in your region, for how much income you're coming in with, and how much what salary you're setting your employees at, and so on and so forth. It's kind of a good benchmarking tool. The AIA Trust is another good resource in terms of mostly like back end things like insurance and PR issues and things like that. They handle a lot of those types of things. And then the AI Leadership Academy was set up a year or two ago, which also kind of has a half opening, basically, kind of for small firm people, because a few SFx people were key in creating the Leadership Academy. So they do try to make sure that there are small firm people being put there, and its job is to kind of shape and teach the up and coming people within your firm that you might think you'd want to have become principals or take over for you when you want to retire. That's kind of the Leadership Academy's role, is to try to bring those people up to speed and offer those resources to small firms that, you see big firms being able to do internally, but it is much harder for a small firm to necessarily be able to do. And then before we get to the Q&A, I'm just going to show you guys the website. So this is the AIA.org/SFX website. Like I'd mentioned, so this is where you guys will be able to come and kind of be a one-stop shop, hopefully, for most of the things. You can find out who the current board is. Next year, when the state reps are filled, that's where you'll find who your state rep is. Here's where you can apply to be a board member or a state rep. Here is where we have the toolkit for how you can create a local chapter SFX group. I want to talk about that a little bit. So what we've done is, in this toolkit, we've created kind of like a guidelines thing, a little example of logo you could use. But the guidelines kind of shows you how you can easily structure. We share that same data of how, like, small firms are broken down, but then how you can go about contacting your local chapter and the regional groups that exist and things like that. How you can name yourselves so that you feel a part of the national group as much as the local group, because historically SFX groups have had many different names. There's the Small Firm Roundtable. There's some are actually called SFx, Chicago. Others have had different names, so that it's just kind of creates some cohesion and sense of, part of the full picture. But then the most important thing is that we've kind of laid out how you can also, forget where I put it in here. Oh, here it is one of the things that we've tested here in my Chicago one with us doing this, was that we created a Slack group. We created Slack channels. So we made a little Chicago SFX group. And this is how you can, participate and set that up. So you can kind of have like your own little committee for private people that run the local SFX group, and then public channels such as consultants, contracts, details, like collaboration and stuff. And that's been some of the most interesting things, is that, obviously there's a lot of DOB issues that happen at the local level that wouldn't happen at the national conversation level, or even the state conversation level for that matter, because obviously, as San Francisco, issues are different than LA issues. So those are the types of things that end up happening on those local Slack channels, which has been really good. And then also, it's been surprising how many people have used the leads and collaboration channel to us. So as things come across your desk that either aren't what you do, or you don't have time for, or something, you can offer them up to the rest of the group. And or if something comes across your desk that you may not be able to handle yourself, or you want to go after something larger, you could offer that up in terms of finding people to partner with to try to go after something. And that's been the most surprising, is I thought that there would be more sense of competition, but actually that's gotten used a lot in Chicago in terms of like kind of sharing work that has come across their desk. So with that, oops. I will stop sharing. And let me pull up your questions.
Before you jump into the questions, Matthew, I'd like to bring up the small firm compensation survey information. All right, so the 2021 AIA Small Firm Compensation Survey Report will be released on November 19th. AIA member price is $45. Non-member price will be $75. This survey, they surveyed 343 small firms in order to get the data for this compensation report. So if you're really wondering like what you should pay your staff or even what yourself should be earning, this is a really good report because it is specifically designed or specifically questions from small firms. Thanks, Matthew, for letting me interject there.
Yeah, no, it's fine. So I'm just going through the thing. So yep, so we kind of covered these links will be shared later. So it's basically everything's on that website to be able to look at. The requirement to be a licensed architect for all positions. I forget if I said in there, I think the requirement for it to be a licensed architect is for the board position, not necessarily the state rep position. It's just a preference on that side. I think for the board position, it was we wanted people to be licensed just because really when you're talking about the big picture things more often than not in running a company, to run a company in most states, you know, most of you have to be licensed anyways, or over 50% or 66%, you know, depending on what the state rules are. So it's just kind of following that same thing that if you're at that upper level dealing with those things, we want you to be able to have had experience or interaction with all of the issues that would come with running a small firm. So that's kind of where the licensed architect requirement for the board level comes from. But from the state rep level, it's just more of like a preference, obviously, than it is necessarily like a requirement in that sense, because you could just be an employee at a small firm and be your state rep, and that really wouldn't be that big of an issue. So the PDF deck, yeah, you'll find that same thing on that link side of the AA./FX or .org/SFX website. The overview of SFX is where you'll find that PDF that we just went through. So you guys can kind of look at everything. There is no real link to the Flipboard. The Flipboard is in there because it's just the tool that we use. So I mention it in the sense that Flipboard is just an app that everyone can have on their phone and computer. And it lets you just kind of curate your own magazine. So basically, as you come across articles, it lets you save them. And so we've created an SFX magazine basically that like you could go on there and find, but really it's just for our internal use so that we invite all of the board members and state reps to be able to contribute to that. So then our outreach group goes through those articles and schedules them out on the social media and decides what gets included in the newsletter and stuff like that. So it's really not so much about having a link to that as it is just like how we internally organize all of the articles and information that we come across. Yeah, and then so, you know, somebody asked about like letting them and Steve know if anyone wants to create an LA chapter of SFX and stuff. So yeah, we can get into anything you guys want to talk about. If you want to talk about how you create local chapters for SFX or how that might tie in or anything like that. Basically, you guys can unmute yourselves if you want, and we can just have a conversation here for the end of everything.
I guess, I mean, we have limited resources as far as just, you know, people showing up at meetings. So we were thinking about combining a couple things. So would it be okay to combine like the Custom Residential Architecture Network and the SFX group in maybe meetings or?
I mean, how you guys?
We're AIA San Diego.
And yeah, California, okay. So
chapter also.
That's interesting. I've never been asked that one before. I don't see any real issue with like a chapter doing, you know, what kind of works the best for them that overlaps and stuff. You just wouldn't like, it wouldn't be dedicated. It would kind of just be more, it'd be a little bit more one way, I guess I would say, in that like you guys will end up getting, you know, whatever resources we're sending out and stuff, but it would be because you would be a little less, you'd be a little more informal. So like in terms of how you guys would tap back in is a little more vague, which I don't really necessarily have a full answer for. I would say, you know, for you guys there, whatever works best for you. I mean, that's why I say everywhere, like we're doing what's trying to work best in the big picture, right? And trying to figure out how that'll get down to everybody and then come back up again. But the answer is there won't be a one size fits all, obviously. So the smaller your chapter is, and the smaller or the different focuses and groups that make it up, it's going to work differently. So, you know, if you want to create a CRAN and SFx one, like, I don't see a problem with that. Like, but yeah, I don't know. It's so hard because it's like, you know, we thought about so many things, but obviously we couldn't figure it out everything. So that's actually one of the ones, the first ones that like stumped me is like, I don't know what we'll do with that. Like,
yeah, well, we have to talk to our executive director. I mean, just trying to get people together now has been kind of difficult. We're just like, okay, how can we get more people together in what, you know, so combining different, so let's combine, you know, because most CRAN members are small firms. So how can we then, you know, and then maybe the women in architecture group also, just as far as like, I mean, so the resources or whatever wouldn't be combined, but maybe the activities would be combined. And, you know, if we were going to get together to talk about, you know, business plans or whatever, you know, can't we all get together, you know, on one Zoom or kind of call about that?
Well, and that is kind of how, so the positive of COVID, obviously, right, has been these types of things, right? Like, I couldn't come to California and give this presentation to all of you in a physical way. Like, that would never happen, right? And so that has been the positive, and that's kind of what we've told people. So now, like, you know, you're thinking San Diego specific, and that I think that's fine. If you want to host things, especially like in-person things, I would say mix all you want. If you want to create something SFx, the thing that we've kind of told larger states like you guys is that go to that next level and create like a regional SFx one. So maybe it's not like, you know, if there's ones that are able to sustain it, like LA and San Francisco probably are, like, maybe they have their own, but then there's like a Southern California SFx, right? Which is kind of like everyone but LA, or it includes LA, right? Like, you can do it however you want, but like, that's kind of what our suggestion has been. And so, like, well, we've done the same thing when we talked to New York. It's like, you know, there's probably a New York City one where it's the 5 boroughs, and then there's like an upstate New York one where it includes like the Buffalo and the Syracuse and stuff, like, because they don't have enough to sustain it themselves. But that way, you know, especially in terms of like creating those like Slack channels and those communications, because it is digital. And so the point is, it's like you can have those Zoom calls and of those groups, and you don't have to physically be, you know, Southern California is still big enough that you're not going to do that in person. But that's the whole point of this new digital age of things is,
yeah,
like,
I mean, we actually
Slack thing and stuff.
San Diego, we have AIA San Diego, and then we have the AIA Palomar chapter, which is like northern San Diego, and then we have, you know, there's an AIA Orange County, right?
Yeah,
so it's like,
right.
got like 3 in,
Yeah, so that would be so like our suggestion is for like small firm people. Like, it's so weird because the division between chapters and states and then like these member groups, it's weird because the lines are entirely different places. Like, we don't care about where the chapter borders are. That's not our point. Like, our point is just serve small firms and help small firms. And basically that's usually how small firms mentality is too. Like, they don't, we most often don't give, you know, an F about rules most of the time, because we're just trying to be nimble and do what needs to happen. And so it's that mentality we kind of take to this too, of, you know, it doesn't matter where your chapter is. Like, if you want to put all 3 chapters that are going up the coast till you get to LA as one SFx group, do it. Like, that would be great. But then your chapter might work differently, like you're saying. Then the chapter itself can have, you know, can combine small firm, CRAN, and the women's group. Like, why not? That's not a competition. That's not at odds. It's just one thing works better for an in-person local thing, and one thing works better for getting small firm people together, right? So that would be my suggestion, is that, like, you guys just trying to think of the scales, and then if you are going to start local groups, that you just start having those conversations amongst the chapters that you would want to kind of like team up with if you don't think you can sustain it enough in your own chapter.
Thank you.
Rona, how do you?
Thank you, Matthew. That was really great. I'm Rona Rothenberg. I'm the first vice president, president-elect of AIA California. I know some of you. And I just want to say that was, I attend a lot of these. My experience with the AIA prior to AIA California was about 20 years with the KCs. So I know all about the KCs, but your presentation was one of the best presentations I've seen that captures the organizational structure and some of its, you might say, opportunities and constraints that are a challenge. And those that you expressed, you really expressed it well about not reinventing the wheel and the lack of repository of knowledge and siloing. This is an issue across the Institute that's being examined by the Members' Voice Task Force. Jana Itzen was with us, and she's on the task force, and I sent her a note and I said, tell the task force consultant to talk to Matthew, because it was, you expressed it so well. And I just didn't realize the statistics exactly. Robert Uli, my colleague, and I on the board have just done a white paper on public architects, because we are both public architects, about the numbers. But when you see the numbers, it's so dramatic. And I just want to say, as an architect in government, I really had a bias for small firms because I got better work from small firms, with almost without exception. And this was over many years. So I think the voice of a collective small firm group, it's really even more powerful than I expected. So I think we can, I asked Hillary, well, what are we doing? How can we help them? So I think that's something we should work on, because it's really has a lot of potential, both from a business standpoint and then just professionally. So I hope you do get to talk to Tecker, which is the consultant to the task force, about your observations, because they're very insightful. And thank you for including me.
Yeah, thanks. Be happy to. I stay on the group one more year as like the ex-official person. So like the past chair stays on for one more year to kind of just help be a resource for the new chair. So I'll still be around one more year, so for next year. So happy to talk to whoever. But yeah, I was, so this presentation actually came from a version of my annual meeting presentation for everyone this year, because this year we had a lot of turnover and a lot of new people. And so it basically came from an onboarding thing for them, really, because so many people came that didn't understand, and I didn't either. Like I spent a year and a half of joining the group just trying to figure out what the hell was going on around me and how everything worked, because it's a massive cluster F. Like it's just so ridiculous to try to understand, and you think you get something and then something else comes in and you're like, what the hell? So like it was just to take what I had figured out that applied to our group so that we could tell them. Obviously, like I trimmed it down for these things, but like that's always my concern coming into this, because it's dense, like it's a lot, and like it's very, it's not a sexy presentation, right? Like it's very organizational and data and all these things, but it's the stuff that actually matters, and you need to understand to really kind of grasp what you can do. Because the thing for our group was crazy was how many people just didn't know the difference between a KC and a member group. And I bet you probably a lot of you didn't even know. Like it's just something they don't tell you. And it's like conversations I've had with the AIA too, of like, you guys just need to do an onboarding thing for anyone that joins AIA, period, of just like the basics. Like here's what shit is. But like, since they don't do that, it falls on the rest of us to try to do it as much as possible. And so hopefully that's what this has been doing. So, because I've heard it both ways. Some places have had reactions like that, and that like, wow, that was really informative, that was like really helpful, and other places really get lost in the weeds, and they were like, because it was too dense. So I get it both ways.
All right, well, we are coming up on our hour right now. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of close this session, but I think we can probably send Matthew some more comments. And do you have your email posted up, Matthew?
I don't, but I'll put that in there. And the last thing I just wanted to say was that the state rep and board applications are open until the 8th. We had said the 31st on our website, but the AIA national call was the 8th, so we've kind of pushed everything to just kind of align with theirs. So there have been about 5 or 6 applications from California to the state rep role, but only 1 to the board role so far. But either way, if anyone's interested in any of those roles, just, you still got a few days to kind of go in and apply to that if you're interested.
But just to confirm, Matthew, did I hear you right that your board prefers people to have served in the state role first, or
Going forward, that'll be true, but the state role doesn't exist right now. It'll exist for the first time next year.
Anyone who's interested in contributing can then apply to the national, just like the KCs are open right now, and you can apply for KC advisory group spots.
Correct.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
right now, both the board and the state, and they'll kind of stay true for a few years as we kind of build it out. We just say we don't say that it's a rule that you have to be. We just say preference will be given to people who have been a state rep first, as we try to fill all these seats.
Well, great. A big thank you again to Matthew for his excellent presentation. If you have made it this far, AIA California staff will submit you for AIA CE credit. It should appear on your transcript in a few weeks. As always, more resources and tools can be found on AIA California's website under the Practice tab. Thank you again for joining us today, and we will see you at our next practice webinar.